Story 1. The Lantern in the Trees. The first night had been silent, almost suffocatingly so. Darren wasn't used to that kind of quiet. He had grown up in the city, where silence was a myth and every hour carried its own symphony of sirens, tires squealing on asphalt, and neighbors shouting through paper-thin walls. But now, here in the state park where he'd rented a cabin for a weekend retreat, the quiet pressed down on him like a weight. The air was cold, sharp with the bite of October. He'd chosen the weekend for its solitude, off-season enough that tourists were gone, but not so late that the snow had closed the trails. He wanted to hike, to reset, to breathe in air that didn't reek of car exhaust. The cabin was old but functional, with stove, kerosene lamps, a sagging couch, and a lofted bed with a quilt that smelled faintly of cedar. He told himself the creaks and groans were natural, the structure settling in the night. But when he woke at 2:14 a.m. to a glow outside the window, something primal inside him went rigid. The glow was pale orange. A lantern light. Darren sat up, heart already drumming. His rational brain tried to reason. It could be a ranger, a late hiker, someone passing by. But the cabin wasn't on a trail. The nearest ranger station was 2 miles away. He edged toward the window. The glass was fogged with his breath, but when he wiped it clear, his stomach twisted. There, hanging from the lowest branch of a skeletal oak, was an old-fashioned lantern. Its light wavered, dim and steady at once, as though someone had just set it there. But the ground beneath the tree was empty. No figure stood nearby. No footsteps crunched in the frost. Only the lantern swayed gently, though the air was still. Darren pulled back from the window, pulse hammering. He told himself it was a prank. Maybe some teenager had left it there before he arrived. But deep down, he knew it hadn't been there when he checked in. He remembered scanning the clearing, dropping his duffel on the porch, glancing around at the trees. He would have noticed a lantern. The glow seeped through the curtains as he tried to lie back down. He turned his back to it, pulled the quilt to his chin. Sleep came in fractured bursts, each time interrupted by the nagging awareness of light bleeding into the cabin. When morning finally arrived, gray and brittle, Darren went outside to check. The branch was bare. No lantern. The frost beneath the oak looked undisturbed, save for his own hesitant boot prints. He stood there for a long moment, fighting the feeling of being watched. The trees loomed, their skeletal arms stark against the pale sky. He shook it off. Sleep deprivation, that's all. Daylight made it easier to convince himself. He hiked for hours, weaving through narrow trails where leaves whispered in the wind. He felt better, lighter, almost foolish. By the time he returned, breathless and sore, he told himself he'd dreamed the lantern. But on the second night, it returned. This time, he didn't see it until closer to 3. He woke because he felt warmth against his eyelids. A faint glow pressed through them. And when he looked, there it was again, the lantern, hanging from the oak. Darren's mouth went dry. He couldn't deny it now. His phone sat on the nightstand. He reached for it, thought about calling someone, but who? The ranger? The police? What would he say? That an old lantern appeared outside his window at night? They'd laugh, tell him to get some rest. But this time, he noticed something else. The lantern wasn't just hanging. It was swaying harder, deliberately, as if an unseen hand was pushing it. He tore his gaze away and stumbled back, knocking into the nightstand. His water glass spilled, darkening the quilt. He swore under his breath, but the sound seemed swallowed by the silence outside. And then came the tap. It was soft, subtle. A fingertip against glass. Tap, tap, tap. On the window he had just been staring through. Darren froze. His throat closed around the scream building there. Slowly, as if every muscle weighed 100 pounds, he turned back. The lantern was gone, but in its place, pressed against the glass, was the faint outline of a hand. 5 pale fingers splayed wide, fogging the window with a cold breath that wasn't his. He stumbled back until his shoulders hit the far wall. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, vibrating in the silence. He lunged for it, swiping it open. No missed calls, no messages. Just the clock reading 3:03 a.m. When he looked back at the window, the handprint was gone. Morning came like a reprieve, but the dread clung to him. He packed his bag, ready to leave. But when he tried his car, it wouldn't start. Dead battery. He cursed, slammed the hood, tried again. Nothing. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away. He'd have to wait for the Rangers' next round. That night, he didn't sleep at all. He sat on the couch with the kerosene lamp burning, listening to every creak, every whisper of the trees. Midnight came and went. 1 a.m. 2. He started to believe maybe it wouldn't happen. Then the lamp flickered. He looked up, and there it was, not outside this time, but inside. The lantern. It sat on the floor in the corner of the room, glowing steady, its glass flecked with soot. He hadn't brought it in. He hadn't touched it. Darren's body locked with terror. The glow painted the walls, making the cabin look older, more rotted, like a place that had been abandoned for decades. The air grew colder. He could see his breath, and then he heard it, a voice. Low, whispering, coming from just beyond the lantern's glow. Light, the way. The words scraped through the silence, dry and brittle. Darren's heart stuttered. He wanted to run, but his legs refused. The lantern flickered again, and in the flash of darkness, he thought he saw something standing beside it. A figure, thin, tall, its face obscured, but its eyes glowing like dying embers. He blinked, and the lantern was gone. So was the figure. Darren collapsed against the couch, clutching his chest. His body shook violently. He sat there until dawn bled into the cabin. When the ranger arrived that afternoon for a routine check, Darren nearly tore the door off its hinges running out. He demanded a jump for his car, muttering about needing to leave immediately. The ranger eyed him strangely, but didn't ask questions. As the engine roared to life, Darren looked in the rearview mirror at the cabin shrinking behind him. For a moment, he thought he saw a glow in the trees, faint but steady. The lantern, hanging there, waiting. He didn't look back again. But sometimes, weeks later, when he lies awake in his apartment, Darren swears he sees that same faint orange glow through his bedroom window. Story 2. The abandoned campsite. The trail was supposed to be well marked. That's what Kira told herself over and over as she adjusted the straps of her backpack and checked the map on her phone again. But the deeper she hiked, the more the path seemed to fray, dissolving into dirt patches and weaving deer tracks that led nowhere. She was 2 hours past her planned turnaround time, the sun already sinking low, painting the forest in long, spidery shadows. A trip meant to clear her mind had turned into a test of nerves. The air was too still. Even the birds had gone quiet, as if they sensed something she didn't. When she stumbled into the clearing, she froze. At first, she thought she'd found another hiker's setup. A campsite. Relief flooded her chest. Maybe someone could give her directions back to the main trail. But as her eyes adjusted, relief curdled into unease. The tents were old. The fabric sagged and was torn in places, weathered from years of neglect. A fire pit sat in the middle, its stones blackened, but filled with cold ash long undisturbed. Rusted folding chairs leaned drunkenly in the dirt. And the strangest part, gear was still there. Backpacks. A pair of boots tipped over. Even a lantern, its glass shattered, hanging from a branch. Kira's mouth went dry. This wasn't just old. It looked abandoned mid-use, as if whoever had camped here had meant to return but never did. She circled the clearing slowly, her boots crunching softly on dry leaves. A heavy sense of wrongness settled over her, growing heavier with each step. She thought of crime shows, of unsolved cases where hikers vanished without a trace. She thought of her own phone battery, dwindling down to 30%. But the truth was, she couldn't hike back in the dark. She'd have to stay here. At least the clearing offered space and some semblance of safety. As the sky dimmed, Kira set up her own small tent a cautious distance away from the abandoned ones. She tried not to look at them as she boiled water on her portable stove, but her eyes kept drifting. The boots bothered her the most. They were placed neatly beside one of the collapsed tents, as if someone had just stepped out of them before crawling inside to sleep. She told herself it was fine. Just old. Just left behind. But when darkness fully swallowed the woods, that comfort vanished. The first noise came around midnight. She had been lying on her back in her sleeping bag, staring at the nylon ceiling, listening to the forest breathe. Then, rustling. Not animal rustling. Heavier. Deliberate. Like footsteps circling the camp. Her pulse hammered. She strained to listen, holding her breath. The sound stopped. Then started again, closer this time. Kira unzipped her tent just enough to peer out. The clearing was bathed in silver moonlight. The abandoned tents loomed like hunched bodies. And her throat tightened. One of the folding chairs was moving. It creaked as it rocked slowly, forward and back, though there was no wind. Kira yanked the zipper closed and pressed her hands over her ears. She whispered to herself that she was imagining things, that stress and exhaustion were playing tricks. But then came the voices. Faint. Indistinct. She couldn't make out words, but it was definitely voices. Low, murmuring, weaving around her tent like strands of smoke. They grew louder near the fire pit, as if a conversation was happening right there. Her body locked. She squeezed her eyes shut. And then, laughter. Dry, hollow, wrong. The fire pit flared. Her eyes snapped open to a glow seeping through the nylon. She scrambled for her flashlight, unzipped the tent just enough to look. The pit was burning. Flames licked the air, orange and hungry, though she hadn't lit anything. The ash she'd seen earlier now blazed with impossible fire, and around it sat figures. At least 4, maybe 5. Their outlines were faint, translucent, flickering in and out of visibility like bad reception. But they were there, shapes hunched in the chairs, faces indistinct, heads tilted toward one another as though whispering. Kira's breath came shallow and fast. Her flashlight slipped from her hand, clattering on the ground. The sound rang louder than it should have. Every figure turned its head toward her. She ducked back inside, dragging the zipper up with shaking hands. Her heart slammed against her ribs, threatening to crack them open. She stayed frozen, waiting, listening. Silence. The firelight dimmed. Minutes stretched into eternity. Eventually, exhaustion overwhelmed her panic, pulling her into a shallow, restless sleep. When she woke at dawn, the fire pit was cold. The chairs were still. The clearing looked as abandoned as it had the day before. But her tent zipper was open, just a few inches. And inside, near her boots, lay a single blackened stone from the fire pit. Kira's hands shook as she packed her gear. She didn't care how long the hike back would take. She was leaving. She shoved everything into her pack, shouldered it, and turned for the trail. But she stopped dead. There, at the edge of the clearing, stood one of the figures. It was more solid now, less translucent. A man, or the echo of one, his clothes decades out of style, his face burned and indistinct. His head tilted unnaturally as he stared at her. And then he raised his hand, not in greeting, in warning. Behind him, the other tents rustled. Shapes shifted inside them, as though waking. Kira ran. Branches tore at her arms, roots caught at her boots, but she didn't stop. She didn't look back. The forest seemed endless, her lungs burning, her vision blurring. When she finally burst onto the gravel road leading back to the ranger station, she collapsed, sobbing, gasping. A ranger found her an hour later. She babbled about the campsite, about the figures, about the fire. He frowned, then told her something that made her blood run cold. There hasn't been a campsite in that area for years, he said. It burned down back in the 70s. Whole group of hikers vanished there. Nobody's allowed past that trail anymore. Kira stared at him, trembling. She never went back. But sometimes, in the dead of night, when her phone buzzes with random notifications she never remembers setting, she swears she hears faint voices, low, murmuring, weaving through her apartment like strands of smoke. And sometimes, when she wakes, there's a blackened stone on her nightstand. Story 3, The Knock in the Forest. The cabin was exactly what Leah had wanted. Simple, remote, and silent. She'd found it listed on a backwoods rental site, the kind that catered to people wanting a digital detox. No Wi-Fi, no cell service, no neighbors. Just 4 wooden walls tucked into the national forest and a promise of stillness. Her friends had thought she was crazy. Alone in the woods? With no reception? That's how horror movies start. Leah laughed them off. She wasn't running toward danger. She was running away from noise. Her life in the city had been nothing but traffic, deadlines, buzzing phones, and restless nights. Out here, there was only the crackle of the wood stove, the hiss of wind through pines, and the occasional caw of a raven. The first 2 days were bliss. She read, hiked short trails, cooked simple meals, and sat on the porch with tea, watching the sun thread its way through the trees. She kept her journal nearby, jotting down observations. The woods smell like rain soaked into bark. At night, the sky spills over with stars. It feels like the world forgot me, and I love it. But by the third night, the forest didn't feel so welcoming. The sounds changed after dark. It was subtle at first, the rustle of leaves, the crack of a branch snapping under weight. She told herself it was deer, raccoons, maybe even a bear. She kept the fire going in the stove, shut the doors tight, and let the flames lull her to sleep. That night, she woke to a sound she couldn't ignore. Knocking. 3 distinct raps against the cabin's front door. Not frantic. Not an accident. Deliberate. Leah sat up in bed, her breath caught in her throat. She told herself it couldn't be knocking. She must have dreamed it. The cabin was miles from the nearest road, nearly a half-hour drive down a dirt path that twisted through the trees. No one should be out there. But then it came again. 3 knocks. Louder this time. She crept out of bed, her feet silent against the wooden floor. Every instinct screamed at her not to look, but curiosity dragged her forward. She whispered, "Who's there?" The words felt pitiful in the stillness. No answer. Her eyes darted to the small window beside the door. Slowly, with trembling fingers, she pulled back the curtain. Only darkness. Thick, absolute. The forest beyond was a void. She waited, her body tight with dread, until finally, after what felt like an eternity, she backed away from the door. She didn't open it. Didn't dare. She crawled back under the blankets, pulling them over her head like a child, telling herself it was nothing. Her heart beat so loud it was all she could hear. When she began to drift into uneasy sleep, the knocking started again. This time, at the back door. 3 knocks. Slow. Deliberate. Her body went cold. She clamped her hands over her mouth to keep from making a sound. Whoever, or whatever, it was moving around the cabin. She didn't sleep that night. She lay awake, rigid, until the first pale wash of dawn lit the window. When the sun rose fully, courage returned in small pieces. She stepped outside, scanning the ground around the cabin. The soil was soft, blanketed in a thick carpet of pine needles. Perfect for catching tracks. But there were none. Not a single footprint, boot print, or mark. It didn't make sense. Leah tried to convince herself she'd imagined it, that exhaustion had tricked her senses. She threw herself into hiking that day, trying to shake the unease. By evening, her body was sore, her legs heavy. She told herself she'd sleep deeper tonight, but dread gnawed at her as soon as the sky darkened. She left the lantern burning low and the wood stove crackling as she climbed into bed. Hours dragged by in restless silence. She almost began to believe the night would pass quietly, until the knocking began again. Front door. 3 slow raps. Then the back door. Then the side windows. Always 3 knocks. Always patient. Her breathing turned ragged. She pressed a pillow over her head, trying to muffle it, but the sound seemed to seep through the walls themselves. And then it did. Knock. 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 From inside the wall, just feet from where she lay. She bolted upright, her skin crawling. The knocks traveled, slow and steady, moving from one side of the bedroom to the other, following her. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Stop," but the knocking only grew louder. Leah spent the rest of the night huddled in a corner, clutching the poker from the wood stove, staring at the walls until the first gray light of dawn crept through the curtains. She didn't wait this time. She stuffed her backpack with whatever she could grab, abandoning food, books, even clothes. She didn't care. She needed to leave. The forest felt different as she staggered down the dirt road. Watchful. Heavy. Every snap of a twig made her flinch. Every shadow between the trees looked like it might reach out for her. When she finally pulled onto the highway hours later, she didn't stop until she was back in the city, the cabin miles behind her. She never returned for her belongings. Days later, the park rangers went to check the cabin. They reported it was empty. No sign of forced entry, no damage, no explanation. But they did notice something strange. Muddy prints. Bare feet. Dozens of them. Leading from the bed to every door and window. And scrawled into the wood of the bedroom wall, beneath where Leah had sat that last night, were 3 crude symbols. Each one made of 3 straight lines. Knock. Knock. Knock.